Crush Debt Now. 3-step negotiation strategy to pay off debt and win financial freedom fast. Written by Thomas Cromwell, narrated by Russell Newton. You have excessive debts with no idea how you'll pay them off? Are you being pursued by your creditors, receiving aggressive phone calls from debt collectors, and letters demanding payment? Are your lenders threatening you with court action and taking some of your wages? 15% of Americans said that they had been pursued by a debt collector, according to a report by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in 2017. Only 1 in 4 of these attended the court hearing. In all the other cases, it's almost certain the collectors will have benefited from default decisions in their favor. A judgment that would allow the debt collector to receive a percentage of wages or sequester other assets. If any of these situations apply to you, then this book has been created to provide your solutions. With this book, you'll discover how you can deal effectively with these problems and crush your oppressive debts. By reading this book, you will understand your debts, how and why they are perpetually draining your health and wealth. Find out if your debt is sustainable. Learn what to do if your creditors attempt to sequester your assets or wages. Understand the legal processes and how to fight or stop the process. Learn how to fight debt collections calls. Know when not to use loan consolidation and why these are frequently scam attacks. Master useful tips on how to negotiate with your creditors and win. Be able to save money on all different types of debt, including utilities, taxes, mortgages, rent, vehicle loans, student debt, credit cards, and other loans. Know when and how to use nuclear options of bankruptcy and insolvency. This book has been created to help people with serious and chronic debt problems. It's not aimed at people who are a few $1,000s in debt, who want to pay down their debts and need to manage their budget better and create savings. This is the topic of our first book in the Personal Finance Wizard series, Perpetually Broke, Living Beyond Your Income. Crush Debt Now is intended for debtors with unsustainable and severe financial issues, where some or all of the debt is already delinquent. I have a wealth of practical and commercial finance experience to draw on in writing this series of books on personal finance. I experienced an upbringing that showed me the value of every penny earned or spent. But I also learned that many other people, even those earning good salaries, have an uncomfortable relationship with money. I can show you how it's possible to rise, phoenix-like, from almost any situation, however desperate it may seem. In this book, we'll cover practical examples and advice to dramatically reduce the burden of your unsustainable debts and bring back sanity to your finances. When you follow the step-by-step guide for all types of personal debts, then you can expect to save thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars in repayments. You can crush your outstanding debt and be completely free and be financially solvent within 2 years. Using the 3-step negotiating strategy in this book is a proven approach for drastic debt reductions for people of all different backgrounds and income levels. The most successful case I faced involved restructuring over 12 different store cards, credit cards, and loans, which transformed the situation for the client, who was facing financial ruin, to clear all those debts in 3 years. According to data from CNBC Money, millennials aged 25 to 34 have the most debt at an average of $42,000. Credit card balances make up the largest part, followed by student loans, and mortgages only a small part, 3%. Naturally enough, this changes as we get older, when mortgage debt becomes the most significant component, followed by credit cards, car loans, then student debt. However, according to Kevin O'Leary, host of the ABC show Shark Tank and personal finance author, age 45 is when people should aim to have all their debt paid off. His logic is that for most people, they're halfway through their careers and working lives, and so need to use the second half to accrue capital for their retirement. While I don't entirely agree with him, I still have a mortgage because it costs me less than inflation. He does make a sound point. Therefore, While it may be difficult for you to remember that you came to drain the swamp when you're fighting off hordes of alligators, it does pay to have a goal in mind. Right now, you're probably wondering just how you're going to stay afloat. To illustrate the key points and provide motivation, this book contains some case studies to show that you can apply the same lessons to your situation. It also offers practical, worked examples where relevant, as this often makes a point better than 1,000 words. Last but not least, I've included all the actionable points in the summary for each chapter. Accept the need to act. Your debts are growing every day. Start reading before your situation spirals beyond redemption and decisions are taken out of your hands. This book contains all the information that you'll need to resolve your situation and sets out clearly and concisely how to tackle each problem. In this day and age, living debt-free is something that is nearly impossible to do. Most people have very limited resources and growing needs, which are often very difficult to meet without taking on some kind of credit. It is common for people to take mortgages in order to purchase homes or acquire student loans to finance their higher education. Debt can therefore be a means to an end, and a very practical way of financing some of our lives' biggest goals. However, in recent years, the issue of debt has taken on very negative connotations, and most people tend to perceive debt as a bad thing, which isn't always a fair assessment. The truth of the matter is that debt is simply a tool whose benefits and or disadvantages depend entirely on how it is used. Understanding how debt works is therefore a very important aspect of financial literacy, which can help you to become more shrewd and disciplined with your money. In this chapter, we're going to look at how debt works, when it becomes sustainable, and how to stabilize your debt to prevent it from ballooning out of control. We'll also discuss the debts that you should prioritize and why to do so. What is debt? Debt essentially refers to anything that is owed by an individual or group to another. In modern parlance, debt is commonly used to refer to money or financial assets that one party owes to another. As we mentioned at the outset of this chapter, debt can be a very powerful financial tool that allows you to achieve certain goals or needs in life. This, however, depends to a large extent on the amount that you are credited with and how you handle it. Taking on a lot of debt or poorly managing the money that you borrow can lead to poor financial outcomes, which can easily destabilize your life. Understanding the difference between good and bad debt, as well as how to handle debt the right way, can help you ease your debt burden and improve your overall financial position. What's the difference between good and bad debt? In general, any kind of credit or loan that helps you grow your income or increase your net worth can be considered as good debt. Some of the most common examples of good debt include student loans. Taking on a loan to finance college or university education can be considered as a good debt for a number of reasons. First, acquiring a higher education automatically increases your earning potential. College graduates generally tend to earn more, on average, compared to employees who only have a high school diploma or less. Obviously, there are exceptions to this, as well as a number of other factors that determine one's earnings in the job market. However, workers who have attained a college education are more likely to receive higher pay than those who haven't received a higher education, even in entry-level positions. In addition to this, employees who are better educated have higher chances of finding new opportunities in the job market compared to those who have not gone through a university or college program. A student loan can therefore be considered as a good investment with the potential for high returns. However, in order to maximize the value of taking on this kind of debt, one should choose a degree program carefully. If there are very few career options or potential for income growth, then a student loan can easily turn into a bad debt. If a college uses misleading advertising to make false claims about job prospects that don't exist, then you may have a case against them and be able to overturn even your federal debts if these can be proven to be material. Mortgage or home ownership. With property prices rising literally by the day, many people are increasingly turning to mortgage loans as a means to purchase homes and achieve a degree of financial independence. A mortgage is arguably the best debt one can take on. This is because it allows you to become a homeowner and cut down significantly on your spending. You can finally say goodbye to monthly rent payments. This provides you with greater financial freedom since you can channel the surplus income towards paying off other debts and making investments, which will ultimately help you to grow your wealth. Residential and commercial properties also generally tend to appreciate in value over time, which means you can sell your property for a much higher price after a few years. Furthermore, mortgage loans tend to have a very low interest. You can pay them comfortably over a given period of time, as long as you're still earning some income. The downside of mortgages occurs when you're unable to pay back the loan, since your property may end up getting repossessed by your lender. Business loans. Unless you have ready seed capital or are able to source funding from friends and relatives, you ostensibly need to take a loan when setting up a new business. During the first few months of setting up a business, expenses and operating costs tend to be higher than profits. Therefore, in order to keep your business afloat, you need to have a capital reserve, which will allow you to pay your suppliers, cover your operating costs, and pay salaries to employees. Getting a bank loan can help you to keep your business running until you're profitable enough to meet your outstanding expenses and even scale up. A business loan is therefore a good debt since it allows you to become financially independent, your own boss, and has a high potential of growing your wealth. As you can see from all these examples, a good debt provides you with the opportunity to increase your earnings and grow your net worth. In contrast, bad debt is any kind of debt that you take on in order to purchase assets that don't generate any income, but instead depreciate in value over time. As a rule of thumb, any kind of debt that leaves you worse off in the long run should be avoided, since they can be catastrophic to your financial life and stability. Some of the most common examples of bad debts include car loans. While owning a car provides you with greater freedom and mobility, which can make your life and work easier, taking a loan to purchase a vehicle is usually not a very wise decision. This is because you end up paying a lot of interest while the value of the car depreciates almost as soon as it leaves the showroom and continues to plummet with usage. If you must own a car, it's always best to purchase a used one and pay cash. You may not exactly end up with a luxury car that gets everyone talking, but you will ultimately save on a lot of money and avoid the stress that you would otherwise have to deal with when servicing the high interest rates that are often charged on car loans. If you don't have cash but still need a vehicle, you can take a small, low-interest loan to buy an inexpensive but reliable car and try to pay back the loan as quickly as possible. You will still have spent a huge amount of money on a depreciating asset, but at least you won't have to pay high interest rates, which can put a serious dent into your finances. Credit cards. Credit cards are without a doubt the second worst debt that one can take on after payday loans. This is because they tend to have the highest interest rates of any kind of consumer loans. In addition to this, the payment schedules are usually set up to favor the creditor. Most people who default on credit card payments often end up accruing very high interests, which they're stuck paying for months or even years. Clothes and consumables. While there's nothing explicitly wrong with buying expensive clothes, phones, and other consumables, acquiring these products on credit is usually a bad idea in most cases. This is because these items do not grow your income in any way and typically lose value very quickly. Every cent that you spend paying back debt on these items is money that you would otherwise put to better use elsewhere, which is why it's always advisable to purchase them in cash. Fortunately, there are a lot of options and alternatives which you can use to acquire these products without having to take on debts. Instead of taking credit to purchase expensive designer clothes, you're better off buying inexpensive but good quality clothes from a thrift shop. Types of debt. Secured versus unsecured debt. There are two main types of debt, namely secured and unsecured debt. Understanding the characteristics of these different types of debt is crucial because it enables you to know which debts to prioritize when it comes to payment. Secured debt essentially refers to any kind of debt that has an asset attached to it as collateral. The most common assets that are normally used as collateral are houses for mortgage loans and cars for automobile loans. These assets provide lenders with leverage, which they can use to recoup their money and minimize the risk of loss. If an individual fails to clear their outstanding debt, then the lender has a right to claim their property. For instance, if you take a mortgage to buy a house and are unable to pay it back, the lender can legally repossess and sell the house to recoup their money. If the sale value is not enough to cover the entire debt, then they may continue to pursue you until they recover the deficit. An automobile loan is also another type of secured debt, since the lender can repossess and resell the vehicle if the debtor fails to clear the debt as agreed. In general, a person who takes up a loan to purchase an asset never fully owns it until they have cleared the outstanding debt. Once the full payment has been made to the lender, the transfer of ownership on the asset is completed. Unlike secured debts, which are backed by collateral, recoupable assets, unsecured debts generally have no collateral rights attached to them and instead rely on the debtor's promise to pay back what they owe. Therefore, the lender cannot make any claim on the assets if the debtor defaults on payment. However, they can employ other avenues to coax the debtor to repay the debt. For instance, they can hire a debt collector to persuade the debtor to clear their debt. If this fails to work, they can file a lawsuit against the person who owes them and convince the court to garnish a percentage of the person's salary, which is then redirected towards debt repayment. Some of the most common examples of unsecured debts include credit card debts, student loans, and medical bills. Is your debt unsustainable? As we've seen from the previous section, debt is not automatically a bad thing, provided it's used for income-generating ventures and is paid back as soon as possible to avoid an accumulation of interest. Gauging your debt level is therefore very important when it comes to figuring out which debts to prioritize. However, identifying a debt problem isn't always easy to do. There are several signs that can help you to determine whether you have a personal debt crisis. These include making minimum payments. While low payments provide you with flexibility and enable you to meet other financial obligations while still servicing your debt, making minimum payments is likely to keep you stuck in a cycle of revolving debt payments. Meanwhile, your interest continues to rack up, which means you end up paying more. Very large minimum monthly payments. If you're making very large minimum monthly payments to service your debt, you're going to have a very difficult time meeting your living costs and may even end up racking up more debt just to compensate for the deficit. In an ideal situation, your monthly debt payments should not exceed 20% of your income. Problems with debt collectors. When creditors and debt collectors start hounding you constantly or threatening to garnish your wages and repossess your assets, this is a telltale sign that your debt has become unsustainable. If you're still earning some income, you should start making payments towards your debt to lower it and stop your creditors from making such threats. Over-reliance on advance cash. If you regularly take cash advances to cover your living expenses, then you're likely stuck in a debt problem. Cash advances should ideally be used only in emergency situations and repaid promptly to avoid racking up interest. Being denied loans or credit. In case you're trying to secure a loan from a bank or other lender, but are constantly getting turned down, you need to take a step back and examine your debt situation. Chances are your credit rating is very poor due to non-payment or minimum payment, which makes lenders very wary about extending any more credit to you. On the off chance that you do get a lender who is willing to give you a loan, their terms are likely going to be very unfavorable. Not growing your savings. Your budget should always include a savings plan of some kind, whether it is an emergency fund, retirement savings, or college fund for your kids. If you always end up with nothing to save after sorting out your expenses and paying bills, then you probably have a serious debt crisis. In order to manage your debt and maintain a good credit rating, it's important to know your debt-to-income ratio. A debt-to-income ratio, DTI, is essentially a metric that compares your overall debt to your income. Lending institutions typically use your DTI to determine whether you're able to make monthly payments and clear your debt within the agreed duration. Having a good DTI, therefore, implies that you have a good balance between your outstanding debts and total income. On the other hand, a high DTI means that you have too much debt compared to your income. Generally, you have higher chances of securing a loan if your DTI percentage is low. So, how does one determine their debt-to-income ratio? Well, in order to calculate your DTI, you simply need to sum up all your monthly debt payments and divide them by your gross monthly income. Your gross income is essentially what you earn every month before taxes and other deductions are made. To illustrate how DTI is calculated, let's assume that you pay $1,500 every month for your mortgage, $500 on a car loan, and $500 for other monthly debt payments. Your total debt payment can be calculated by summing up all these payments. $1,500 plus $500 plus $500 equals $2,500. If your gross monthly income is $5,000, then your DTI can be calculated as follows. 2,500 divided by 5,000 equals 0.5 times 100 equals 50%. This would be considered high because if taxes take around another 30 to 35% of your income, this would leave you only $750 to $1,000 for the rest of your needs and wants. In general, lenders are more likely to loan you money if your DTI is less than 36%, with no more than 28% of that going to mortgage payments. However, your DTI ratio doesn't really affect your credit score directly, since credit agencies are not privy to your earnings and are therefore unable to make this calculation. Nevertheless, keeping your debt-to-credit ratio is still very important, since it determines the ease with which you're able to secure loans from lenders. There are two ways in which you can cut down on your DTI to ratio. One of the ways to do so is by increasing your income. You can achieve this in a number of ways, such as requesting a pay rise from your employer, finding another job or side hustle to supplement what you're currently earning, completing another course or program to improve your marketability and raise your salary. Alternatively, you can reduce your DTI by cutting down on your spending and minimizing debts. Reasons why you may be sinking in debt. Controlling your debt is crucial if you want to take charge of your finances and achieve the goals that you've set for yourself. In order to do so, however, you need to get to the root of why you are in debt. Understanding why you have so much debt in the first place can help you to identify the mistakes that you've been making and how to solve them in order to be debt-free or have sustainable debt. If you're wondering why you're sinking into so much debt, here are some of the top reasons why you may find yourself in that situation. 1. Living beyond your income. One of the most common reasons why you may be struggling with debt is because you're trying to maintain a lifestyle that is beyond your income. You may be spending too much money purchasing expensive and flashy items in a bid to keep up with others, which inevitably forces you to take on a lot of debt to furnish that lifestyle. 2. Overspending. Sometimes all it takes to get yourself trapped in a cycle of debt is failing to rein in your spending. You don't necessarily have to be buying luxury items, but spending too much on living costs can easily result in a blow-up of debt. 3. Reduced income. If your income suddenly reduces due to losing your job, for instance, this can put a dent in your budget and force you to take on debt in order to meet your living costs. This is why many financial experts usually advise people to diversify their sources of income. 4. Little or no savings. One of the reasons why including savings in your budget is always recommended is because it provides you with a financial cushion in case of unexpected events. Ask yourself this. Suppose you lost your job today. would you still be able to maintain your current lifestyle? If you've not been saving part of your income in an emergency fund, chances are you would have a hard time staying afloat unless you take on some kind of debt. The cost of debt. Whenever you take credit, whether it's a mortgage, a payday loan, or a student loan, you're essentially using someone else's money today with the promise of paying it back in the future. Since the individual or institution that lends you the money does not have access to it until you pay it back, they have to charge interest on top of the loaned amount. Interest is the cost that one is charged for using borrowed money. An alternative way of thinking about interest is that it is the profit that an individual or institution earns from lending money to another party. Interest is normally calculated as a percentage of a loan that is payable to a lender for the privilege of using their funds. Whenever you borrow money, you always have to pay back the total amount in addition to an interest, which is charged to compensate the lender for the risk of lending their money. So, how much interest does one pay when they take out a loan? Well, this depends on a number of factors, such as the amount of the loan, interest rate, and duration of repayment. In general, longer-term loans and loans with high interest rates tend to result in higher costs for the borrower. Credit card loans, payday loans, and, to a lesser extent, car loans are typically charged much higher interest rates compared to mortgage loans. Taking any of these loans is therefore likely to be very costly in the long run. To illustrate how costly debt can be, consider the following table. Interest on all loans is assumed to have a monthly compounding when a debtor fails to pay interest on a given month. The only exception to this rule is payday loans, which are typically compounded fortnightly, every 2 weeks. The interest to be paid is the total amount of interest that one owes, assuming you make no payments over the duration of the loan. This means that for the payday loan, you borrow only $300, but you have to pay back an eye-watering $1,863 if you borrowed the money for 1 year. Normally, you're expected to pay it back within 14 days, which makes it seem reasonable, when in fact it is usurious. The fees for non-payment of interest can be very high, especially for payday loans and credit card loans. In some cases, they can even be more than twice the amount of annualized percentage rate, APR. The annualized percentage rate is essentially simple interest expressed in a way that allows for comparing different compounding periods. Understanding your budget. The number one reason why most people usually find themselves sinking in debt is simply that they spend more than they earn. In other words, they don't live within the confines of their budget. If you're struggling with debt, therefore, understanding your budget and optimizing it to suit your income and expenses is absolutely important. Let us now look at some of the steps you need to take in order to budget appropriately and cut down on your debt a lot faster. Track your spending. In order to determine whether your expenditure exceeds your income, you need to start keeping track of your monthly spending. Make a list of every penny that you spend on everything from food, clothing, entertainment, and utilities. You can either go the traditional way of writing down your spending with a notebook and pen, or take advantage of the numerous budgeting apps that are available today. I provide a budgeting sheet as part of my free financial toolkit. Add up your total expenditure and income. Once you've determined your total monthly spending, the next thing you need to do is add that with your income. This will help you to easily tell if you're spending more than you're earning. Consequently, you'll be able to identify the changes that you need to make in order to make your budget more practical. Create a budget. If you've realized that your spending exceeds your income, you need to make cuts to your spending until it is less than your income. Ideally, you should make a budget first, and then look at the areas where you may need to cut down in order to reduce your spending. By creating a budget and sticking to it, you will eliminate the tendency to overspend and cut down on your borrowing habits, which are keeping you stuck in debt. The table below compares the difference in what will happen to your wealth if you either spend $100 more than you earn, the debtor, or spend $100 less than you earn, the investor. In the debtor column, you have a negative cash flow, earning minus expenditure, per month of $100. After 1 year, you will owe $1,388 of debt, finishing owing $10,560 after 5 years based on the 23% APR. On the other side, $100 positive cash flow based on a 9% return on investment in the stock market, which is conservative. The returns have been in excess of 11% over a 30-year period. Then you finish with an investment of $7,505 after 5 years. Establish an emergency fund. If you are earning a monthly income, it is absolutely important that you put a percentage of that into an emergency fund. As a matter of fact, many financial experts usually recommend creating an emergency fund before saving money for other goals such as retirement or vacations. Ideally, you should put at least 10% of your income in an emergency fund until you have enough funds to meet your living expenses for at least 3 months. Having an emergency fund provides you with a measure of financial security in the event of unforeseen occurrences, such as job loss, car breakdown, or medical emergencies. Without an emergency fund to cater for these unexpected expenses, you may end up having to take on credit, which can make your debt situation even worse. Here are some of the key points to take away from this chapter. Debt can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how it is utilized and repaid. Any debt that helps you increase your income or improve your financial situation can be considered as good debt. Examples include mortgage loans, student loans, and investment loans. Any kind of debt that is used to purchase consumer items or depreciating assets is a bad debt which should be avoided. Examples of this include car loans and credit card loans. Creating and maintaining a workable budget will help you keep your spending in check and avoid borrowing too much. Maintaining a low debt-to-income ratio is very important, since it proves your debt is sustainable and makes lenders more confident about your ability to pay back loans. This has been Crush Debt Now, 3-step negotiation strategy to pay off debt and win financial freedom fast. Written by Thomas Cromwell, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2020 by Thomas Cromwell. Production copyright by Thomas Cromwell.